This is Dev Propulsion Labs, a podcast about building successful developer tools hosted by Evil Martians. I'm Marina, the CEO at Evil Martians, and today I'm excited to have Jono Bacon, a true legend in open source communities, who's famous for building Ubuntu community, working as a director of community at GitHub, and for writing a book, People Powered. Actually, many books, but I think this one is most popular. And also, Evil Martians are a part of Community Leadership Accelerator by Jono. And that's why we actually chatted just yesterday. So welcome to the show, Jono. I'm happy to see you again.
Thank you. Yeah, it's great to see you, Irina. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
I think you, Jono, was one of those people who are responsible for the fact that we have so many communities in developer tools especially. Is it possible to create a new one in 2024 now that we have so many already, right? What do you think about this?
Yeah.
Is it saturated?
The way I look at it is there's kind of two layers to it. I think with most things that we talk about, there's a underlying human layer, and then there's a strategic tactical layer that sits on top. The underlying human layer is that we as human beings, we are social creatures. We like spending time with other human beings. And there's all kinds of elements that go into that. There's kindness, there's empathy, there's reciprocity. We fear loss of things. We always look to kind of collect and gain resources. So any community in any place, not just dev tools, that enables reciprocity, kindness, that helps us to reduce loss or failure, and helps us to gain knowledge or insight, there's an opportunity for a community in any of those places. But when it comes to dev tools specifically, I think you need to have a tool that people actually want to use. You can't build a community around a terrible tool, a project, or a product. So if you've got a dev tool that actually adds something new, that is differentiated, that does something a little bit different, then there is an opportunity to build a community around it, especially if that dev tool, which most dev tools, requires some level of has some level of complexity or configurability, right? Most dev tools you can apply in multiple different ways. You can configure in multiple different ways. But what won't work is just throwing it online at Discord and expecting people to show up. Just because you've got a great dev tool does not mean that a community will manifest by itself. It still requires a lot of work, but there's the opportunity for it. So.
How do we do this then? How do we start a community? Imagine we have a great tool, right? And yes, it requires complexity, like you said. It requires
right.
configuration and learning and many things. But what's your advice? What's your maybe secret sauce for the new communities?
So there's massive amounts of complexity in how you build communities, right? There is, which platforms do you use? How do you incentivize people? How do you build engagement? How do you create content? What is the balance between the company and the project? There's all this complexity, but fundamentally, I think it can all be boiled down to something very simple, which is who is your audience and how do you deliver a ton of value to them with very little required of them, right? So the first step in serving this is if you've got a dev tool, like let's say your dev tool is let's say it's a programming language. Like let's say you've built like a functional programming language or something along those lines. The first question I would ask is, who is the audience for this programming language? And what are the things that suck for them? What are the things that they struggle with? Because a lot of people, when they build communities, they try and say, oh, wow, we're doing this new thing. And there's, and if you come to our community, you can do all these cool new things. Whereas most people are too busy for that, right? The cheesy analogy here is if you're a dentist and you've got two people sat in front of you, one person wants to get their teeth whitened, one person's got horrendous toothache. The person with the toothache is going to demand you more urgently than the person who wants to get their teeth whitened. So when you're able to get really dialed in on that audience, and then you're able to deliver value to that audience that solves those pain points, that's the beginning step. The problem with a lot of people when they build communities, what they do is they tend to say, okay, well, we need to start with tactics. We need to put, we need a Discord, so we'll put that online. Oh, we should start blogging. We should start going to conferences and doing talks. And it gets very expensive and doesn't really ship a lot of results. I would much rather start with, okay, let's figure out the 3 things that suck most for your audience. How do you run an event? How do you create a bit of content? How do you kick off some discussions in your community about solving those problems? And we want to create an environment where people feel not just that they can get help solving using your dev tool, like, because a lot of communities, they suck. They're just Q&A forums, and who would ever want to go back to that? There's no reason to do that. But if you go back to this community, like, my people are here, and you have conversations not just about using the dev tool, but it's, if you're worried about layoffs in tech, if you're trying to figure out which conference to go to, if you want to get a promotion, like, if that's your people and your people are helping you with those things that you care about as a developer, then it becomes a pretty special place for you. And that, to me, is all about figuring out who your audience is.
Yeah, it kind of brings me to this other question of, you talk about people and understanding the audience, and so those people that are essentially your audience, they are already part of some community often. For example, you build a new language, like you said, right? And maybe it has a special purpose, and maybe those people are already somewhere, right? Discussing this purpose and using the tools that exist and working together.
Yeah.
And it's almost like, I don't want to say that there are kind of authentic and less authentic communities, but you could say there are communities built around pure open source, right? Or pure, whatever, hobbies, right? Non-commercial at all, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So kind of super authentic is just people who got together to do stuff together, discuss it, have fun. And those are super authentic and all. And us building those sort of products-related communities, they feel a bit less authentic, or a lot less authentic, especially at the beginning, when you're trying to build it really hard, nobody engages. I wonder if there is a path, sort of, for example, between this, right? For example, with Anycable, part of what we do, we're not creating a new community. We are trying to embed ourselves in the existing Rails community and help this community as much as we can. And so sort of be there in the places where this community already exists. I also know the other example is one of our clients, TechBlitz. They organize VidConf, and it's not a TechBlitzConf, which, to be honest, those conferences circling around one product, they are pretty often pretty weird. I mean, you need to have a really popular product for that conference to be fun, right? The kind of Product X conference, So what I like about StackBlitz, they do VidConf, right? They do VidConf, and it's not a StackBlitzConf. It's a conference that is super, super exciting, super great for this big community of people using it. Yeah, so I'm just trying to figure out what's the relation, what's the organic path between supporting existing communities and building your own, so that it's useful.
It's a fascinating topic to me because, and I'm always on the fence talking about this, because this can very easily segue into identity politics, which is a very controversial topic. But what I mean by this is, I personally am not a fan of identity politics. So for those people who are watching or listening to this that are not familiar with this is where people will self-identify with a group, right? And we typically will see this within demographics, like you're a woman, or you're a person of color, or you're Italian, or I'm British, or all these different demographics. Usually the reason why people do that is very well-intentioned and positive in nature. It's to support that group, to help that group to have equal opportunities for the future. The problem with identity politics is it boils us as human beings down to a very basic set of building blocks, and we are more complicated than that, right? So if I just look at myself as an example, yes, I fall into the British group, but I also fall into the American group. I'm an American citizen. I've lived here for 15 years. So the reason why I'm saying this as this relates to communities is, if you've got a dev tool and you've got, let's say, a Rails dev tool, you can grow your community around that dev tool, but you are a member of the Rails community. And more broadly, you're probably a member of the open source community. And more broadly, you're a member of the technology community. And you'll be a member of whatever region you're in. So my view on this is that we don't try to compete or replace. We try to differentiate. Going back to just us as human beings, speaking for myself as a British guy, as an American guy, as a heterosexual, as a Iron Maiden fan, using those examples. And when I'm part of my Iron Maiden community, I want that to be differentiated than being part of my British community. Like when I hang out with my British friends, I get something very different to hanging out with my iMaiden friends, as an example. And that's where I think it should apply to communities, is if you have your individual community wrapped around your dev tool, provide something different that you can't get anywhere else. Because we will always be part of multiple different communities. Where it gets a little tricky is when you want to grow your project inside of somebody else's community. We talk about this all the time with our members in the Community Leadership Core, because to me, where people make a mistake is that they go into another community. So let's say you've got a Rails project and then you go into the broader Rails community and try to promote it. That can often end in disaster because people generally don't like self-promotion. These communities generally prohibit self-promotion, et cetera, et cetera. So to me, what we're starting to see when it comes to a lot of people online these days, I sound like an old man. Hang on, I am an old man, are wanting to promote their careers, wanting to grow their careers by self-promotion. They're talking about all themselves and their accomplishments, and they're showing off, and they've got these horrible pictures of them sat in first class on an airplane, which I can't stand. But the way you grow your career is not through showing off. The way you grow your career is through doing great work. And in the same way, I think the way in which you influence another community, if you've got a Rails app or tool and you want to grow yourself in the Rails community, or if you've got a cloud native tool, you want to grow yourself, you want to grow awareness inside of the CNCF community, for example, the way in which you do that is being a great participant, is being a great member of that community and helping and lifting other people and helping them to be successful. It's not through subversively chatting about your tool and showing off your tool. It's by being a great participant in the same way, like I say, in the same way that the way you grow your career is by being doing great work. So that was a very long and complicated answer, but like, I think the key thing is that we shouldn't try and silo ourselves into individual groups. We should play a role in many groups, differentiate in those groups, and then we build success through being a great participant in those groups.
As you were talking, I was thinking of this, that as you become this useful member of the community, you also learn a lot about people, and in this community you learn a lot about their problems, and then you can really sort of position your products community as something else, not as something centered around the problem that many people have, right? Or around the worldview that this kind of subgroup has. Totally, even if we talk about Rails or something like this, which is not a large community, even within this community, there are different perspectives on the technology and what we should use and the ecosystem and stuff. I think I'm just getting to understand this,
So I think you make a really interesting point there, Irina. Like, one of the things that it took me way too long to realize is that the way in which we build buy-in, the way in which we get somebody to use your project, to listen to you, to buy your product, to join your movement, whatever it might be, is actually by asking nothing of them. A classic example of this is actually in sales, and this will tie back to communities in a moment, is that we've all been into those stores where you get the hard salesperson who's badgering you to go and buy something. And we tend to reject that, right? We get cold calls on the phone, we get spam through email, because that person has no relationship with you and they're demanding you do something for them. And we just reject that. It's actually pretty much our amygdala kind of kicking in and saying, no. Whereas when you build a relationship with somebody and they don't ask anything of you, but they're constantly just helping you and they're providing guidance and they're mentoring you, we build tremendous amounts of respect for them. When I hired my business coach, the first conversation I had with him, which was 45 minutes, he just asked a ton of questions about me. And I kept asking him, like, can you tell me a little bit about your service? He's like, we'll get to that. I just want to learn a bit more about you. I just want to talk about you. And then we actually ran out of time. We scheduled in another call and he continued the conversation asking about me. And then eventually he started talking about his services. And I had massive respect for that. So to me, the way in which we build, especially when we build a community, is when you just oversupply people with value. Like, one of the things I just try to do myself is, and I'm hoping people see this, anyone who follows me on social media, is every day I try to put out stuff that is useful, whether it's like little nuggets of wisdom, hopeful wisdom, or whether it's like links to YouTube videos or links to articles, or, you know, people can go and get my book for free, and when people join my email, like 98% of it is just stuff that hopefully is useful. There's a couple of emails in there about the Community Leadership Core, but it should be 90% value and 10% sales. And I think when we do that, that's how we really kind of move the needle. The problem is that a lot of people, when they build communities or when they build businesses, they say, we want you to do this. Go and sign up for our webinar. Go do this. Go buy our product. Go download it. And it's too aggressive.
It's actually so well aligned with the philosophy of open source. We are giving the product of our work to the community for people to use. And this is an exciting feeling when somebody's using your product and sending you
That's amazing.
not just the issues, maybe some kudos and Yeah, that's an amazing feeling of connection, right? Feeling of connectedness.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, Irene, as well, because I think that's the thing that turns it from being something that's useful to turns it into something that's magical. Is like when I started out in open source, for example, in 1998, I got into open source the year before I went to university. I took a year out before I went to university. And then I went to university and I met other open source Linuxy people. And in England, there used to be this event called the Linux Expo. It was in Kensington, Olympia. And opposite the venue is a pub called the Hand and Flower. The event was like, companies with booths and exhibits and all that kind of stuff. But the British Linux and open source community would end up in the Hand and Flower at the end of every day. And it seemed very casual in nature. But in that pub forged, I don't even know how many relationships of people I'm still friends with today. In that pub, I got drunk with these two guys who were running Linux, who just started a magazine called Linux Format, which led to writing my first article, which then led to my career starting. And it was all based upon just people hanging out with each other and getting to know each other. And that to me is when it becomes magical, because this is going to sound cheesy, but it's really powered by a set of friendships at that point. And that is one of the great values of in-person events. I know you go to a lot of events, and I know you cherish this a lot. Like, you build these relationships, and the Evil Martians team are just a great example of this. Like, you're all so friendly and so easy to talk to, and you're not just interested in doing business. You want to get to know people. You want to build a relationship with them. And I think that's one of the reasons why you folks are successful, is it's so important.
I think I'm only myself starting to understand this and starting to build the relationship with Rails community or broader open source community. Myself, I just started it last year, frankly, and I was doing just that, trying to help people, trying to understand how to be helpful. And this year, this is super exciting. I cannot stop talking about it, but I'm doing a keynote at RailsConf, and in preparation for this
Yeah,
keynote,
I saw that online. That's exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's something next level for me. And in preparation for this keynote, I'm talking to all the startups that chose Ruby in recent years. And it's such an incredible exercise, you could say, where I talk to people, I learn their worldviews, I learn how they're making choices, I learn the concerns they have about the ecosystem and the community, and the gratitude they have for the ecosystem and the community. It's incredible. I feel this is the work I should have been doing from the beginning.
So earlier on, I think you made a really interesting point there, Irina, because you talked about when you do something and it's not going to plan, or you're not getting the results you want, or you feel like people don't want what you're building. And one thing that was a really monumental shift for me that can be applied to building communities as well as just building businesses and anything really. Everyone talks about how, we have to learn from failure, fail forward, but it's too generic. Like, to me, what was really insightful was when I realized from other people, I didn't come up with this, that failure that generates data is amazing, right? So for example, we had a conversation with, it was either yesterday or the day before yesterday, I forget, with one of our community leadership core members. They recently launched a new community. I think it was like 5 or 6 weeks ago. And the engagement has not been great so far, which is very normal with brand new communities. And the person who I was chatting to that Mindy and I were chatting to on the phone, she was a bit down. She was a little bit like, we spent so long like preparing for this thing. And I said to her, I think she thought I was kind of crazy, because she could see I had this giant grin on my face. And I was like, I'm really excited by this, because now we've got data. Like, previously we were somewhat guessing their audiences and which platforms they should use, what content they should put out there. But I was like, now it's out there in the wild. And now we've got, they ran a couple of events. We could see how well their landing page was converting, how their email is performing. We can see which conversations are generating discussions, generating responses. Even though there's not a lot of conversation going on, we have little bits of data coming in. And the way in which we improve anything is we look at data, we try to figure out what the patterns are, and then what we do is we iterate based upon what we're seeing. What's nice about it, it takes a while to kind of get used to this kind of way of looking at the world, but what's nice about it is that you become basically just unstoppable, right? Because every time you get something doesn't go well, but you get data, you're like, great, now I've learned something. Now I know what to do. Like even when we launched the Community Leadership Core, one of the things that was very important to me was having these two graphs graphing like growth and maturity of a community and graphing skills development in a community. I thought that was going to be critical. Executives and founders were going to want that. It turns out nobody cares. Nobody was using it. Nobody wanted it. Nobody was interested in it. Nobody needed it. And I was somewhat emotionally attached to that feature. And Mindy actually, who runs member success, she was like, Jono, nobody cares. You just got to kill your darlings, you know? So even in those moments when it's really tough, when it's really hard, and it feels like you're building something that nobody wants, you just got to keep going. I always say to people, like, you want to keep pushing for at least 6 to 8 months, just constant iteration. If nobody cares after 6 to 8 months of doing literally everything you can do, then maybe it's not working. But most things will work. You just got to find your people.
Jono, what do you think are the key things that stop people from building better communities? What do you think are the mental maybe blocks, the wrong ideas or something like that?
I think fear is a major thing that stands in the way because we are predisposed to not wanting to look stupid in front of other people. So if we're going to build a community, then you put yourself out there. Like, oh, we might attract all these community members, or we may attract, a couple of people who we really want in our community, but then it may be dead as a doornail and nobody's talking, nobody's engaging. And the key thing to remember here is people aren't taking notes. This is an issue with imposter syndrome. Part of the reason why it flourishes in people is there's a feeling that people are watching your career and watching what you're doing. And when you screw up, they're noting it down in their brains. Nobody's paying you that much attention. Like, and I get it. Like, I with each of the new things I've ever done, I've had monumental amounts of anxiety. I remember leaving GitHub. I was at GitHub for about 7 months. And I realized it wasn't for me. I took on this like senior or like director of community role at GitHub. A lot of GitHubbers are amazing. There were some GitHubbers who were not amazing. But it was like a big company. I loved working with lots of different companies instead of working at one. It wasn't for me. But in making the decision to leave, it's the only time in my life I've ever had a panic attack. Literal, like brown paper bag, breathing into a bag. It was not because of money or anything to do with that. It was, what will people think? And it's when I realized I need to check my ego a little bit, that nobody's paying attention. And even if they do see that you left GitHub after 7 months, who cares? Like, who cares? And, when I launched the Community Experience Masterclass, panic. When I launched the Community Leadership Core, panic. When I started consulting, panic. And I think it's a fear of looking stupid in front of your colleagues or your friends or your peers. And the key thing is, I think anxiety is actually a co-pilot. Like, anxiety is sat next to you, making you work a little bit harder, keeping you moving forward, so long as you control it, as long as you don't let it dominate you. So fear is the main thing. And my view is just get out there and do it. And if it doesn't go well, then okay, we'll shut it down, and that's fine. And people will have forgotten about it, in a year from now. It's no big deal.
Yep.
That's the main thing that stands in the way. The other thing I will say is workload and prioritization. Too many people have big, lofty ambitions for what they're going to do with the new community. And they're like, yeah, we'll do a podcast and we'll put a blog together and we'll go and speak at all these events. And Irene, I know you're probably sick of hearing me say this by now, but progress over perfection. Like, just do something small and get it out there, get a win.
Yeah.
We got to feel like we're getting wins. And then iterate.
That's true. And I think it's a great reminder that sometimes when you're chatting with all the startup founders, you think that everyone is doing so great. Everyone is having tremendous success except you, of course.
Yeah.
But then, you got to remember that inside that picture, there's always pain. There's always suffering, fear, anxiety, and all those things. What I like about meeting people, by the way, in person,
Yeah.
is they open up much more freely and sharing all their fears with you. And just knowing that people have problems is also, by the way, seeing in community leadership core that people also do not have overnight success necessarily is an important part of support that I'm getting.
That's a great point, because I think especially now we live in a world where, like, again, I'm going to sound like a grouchy old man, but people upload stuff, like every photo has got a filter attached to it. I posted about this on LinkedIn the other day. I can't stand people humble bragging about themselves sitting in first class. Like, I can't wait to see everybody at KubeCon. And it's like, it's just showy. And it's like people want to present a picture, a version of themselves that in many cases is not completely accurate. To me, what I really admire is I admire people in positions of leadership where they talk about where they are vulnerable, where they say, I did this thing and it didn't go well. Because to your point, Irene, like, nobody starts from a position of like, oh, it goes perfect, right? There's very few examples of people who do something and then they have overnight success. Most people have had to grind through it. And seeing people on that journey, I think, is amazing. There's not enough of that on the internet, I feel like. There's not enough of people telling the story. And I'm as guilty as anybody else. Like, I try to be as open as possible and try to, like, talking about GitHub earlier on, like, that was a giant screw up on my part. Like, I shouldn't have gone and worked there. But we just live and learn, so.
I really appreciate these words and your openness and vulnerability. And my commitment is to try and be as vulnerable as possible. It's funny, somebody yesterday on the internet told me that I am one of the successful people. And I was like, who are you talking about? Like, I didn't understand, like, that the person was referring to me. Yeah. Because of course it's all relative, right? And of course you never feel like, oh yeah, I've done something. Yeah. It's never there. It's all relative. So yeah, it's a great inspiration to try and be authentic and build authentic organizations and authentic communities where people are just can be, right, their full selves and can come with their maybe vulnerabilities and maybe weaknesses, right? We all have them,
Yeah.
that's for sure.
Earlier on, when we talked about the difference between something being useful and magic, to me, that's when the magic sets in, is when people really become themselves. Like, I go to a conference every year in Hawaii, and it's people sitting around on beanbags chatting to each other. And it's really interesting people, like it's founders and it's VCs and it's lots of interesting people. What I love about it is that people just are very, very open about things. And I don't get that in many other places. And some of my favorite events, like going to the SoCal Linux Expo in LA, which is happening right now. I'm bummed because I can't go to this one, but I've been going there for like 15 years. And it's the people that bring me to that event, or whether it's the Open Source Summit or whether it's KubeCon. It's amazing when you have those conversations. But it takes a high level of trust. And I think a lot of people, the tricky thing in talking about people being open and vulnerable is it's way easier to do that when you have some level of success. If you're right at the beginning of your journey, if you're just getting started, it's hard to do that because you are riddled with fear and the stakes are high, right? Like, oh, I got to get my first job and the stakes are super high. You don't want to screw it up. So, it is something that is definitely biased towards experience and age. Like, it's easy to do this when you're 44 as opposed to being 24. So.
Notice how Jono is able to distinguish fear, right, among other emotions. And this is an important skill. And I think I'm starting to feel that understanding the emotion in the community members, in people, is super important. And understanding the emotion that they crave, sort of what they want. And giving people what they want emotionally in the community is also a super important skill. Yeah. Some people have it naturally, and others, like me, just have to learn it and study it.
That's such a great point and it makes me think of two things. One is, and this kind of ties to a broader comment on people and life as we have it today, is a lot of people will see a frontline emotion and they will judge a human being based upon what they see, right? So for example, if somebody's angry, it's easy to say, why are they so angry? Or, if they're unreasonable, or if they're arrogant, or if there's a negative kind of emotion. But usually what's happening is behind the scenes, there's a puppet master who's making that happen. That's the puppet you're seeing, and you're not seeing the puppet master. So anger and narcissism and arrogance are all manifested typically from insecurity and fear. And what's interesting to me is that inside of a community, you have all of these different people assembling, and people aren't being their real selves, like we talked about earlier on. So when you can kind of build a relationship where you can kind of just peer into the puppet master a little bit behind the scenes, it builds a really strong sense of purpose. I was chatting to actually another Community Leadership Core member yesterday, where this guy has been a little bit distant in calls. Like, he's never really said anything, and sometimes been a bit defensive. But yesterday we kind of unpicked it a little bit, and we kind of figured out what some of the driving forces were behind why he was doing this. And it was primarily like he feels like his hands are tied at the company he works at, and he doesn't feel like he can do a good job because his leadership is like limiting him. So we kind of dug into that a little bit and mapped out a pathway forward to try and gain some of that flexibility so he could then feel like he was doing a good job. And the relationship completely shifted. He switched away from being in defensive mode. And we talked about like very practical things he could do to do that. But the other thing to me is a very practical thing for people who are listening to this and watching this is everyone likes to send swag to people, like t-shirts and water bottles and whatever else. But the most important thing to do in any community or company is not to send people swag. That's easy, but it's expensive. Logistically, it's a pain in the butt, all the rest of it. The most important thing is to make people feel seen and validated. So one of the things I always recommend, Irina, you've heard me say this, is when somebody comes into a community and they start participating you're a great example of this, Irina, as the CEO of Evil Martians, is if you DM somebody and say, I just wanted to say, we really appreciate you being in the AnyCable community, as an example. That's a huge deal. There's a company in the community leadership called Delipso, and Steve Manuel, who is the CEO of Delipso, they've got this great project called Extasm. He's on Discord, literally just messaging people and responding and solving problems. So they go and hover over his little avatar and they see that he's the CEO and they're like, whoa, that's cool. That's way more valuable than any t-shirt or water bottle that you send out to people. It's that sense of being seen and being heard. And then, human beings emulate our leaders. So and it goes both ways. Like if someone's an asshole, that manifests in their direct reports, for example, or if somebody's amazing, it manifests. So when you see that kind of behavior, other people do the same thing. They go and help each other out as well. And it all gets to that, like reading emotion and then just seeing people and making people feel part of something.
That's a great advice. I love this. So I love the advice of actually going and DMing people, thanking them for their involvement. And it may seem like of course, it doesn't scale, but Paul Graham tells us to do things that don't scale at the beginning, right? So maybe this is one of those things that can help you build a community from at the beginning, to kind of go and directly engage with people, go and talk to them in person. And then somehow, I like that in your book, Jono, you can remind me, but there are stages of community or maybe like a person that they go through. I think some of that direct communication can sort of warm their heart and prepare them towards becoming the actively engaged member.
What that is there's kind of 3 stages. I call it casual, regular, and core. And when they start out, when anyone joins a new community, they're a casual member. They're showing up very infrequently. They're not sure if this is a place that they should spend time at. They've got a million other things they should be doing or they'd rather be doing. So we have to get them to be a regular member. And being a regular member is when they're showing up regular as clockwork every single week. It takes about 2 months for someone to go from being a casual member to a regular member because it takes 2 months psychologically to build a habit. If you want to get fit, eat healthier food, if you want to commit to your hobby, it takes about 2 months, where you have to kind of force yourself to do it to where it feels natural. The only way in which we can get someone to go from a casual to a regular member is to deliver a regular stream of things that are valuable and useful to that target audience. We break it into what we call the 3 C's: content, conversations, and carrots. So content is where you put out, you share material. It doesn't have to be content you create. It can be content that you curate. YouTube videos, book recommendations, articles, Hacker News posts, as well as content that you create. So every week when they go in there, they're like, that's cool, that's interesting. The conversation starters are where you kick off discussions that generate engagement, get people participating. And then the carrots are what we just talked about in terms of like seeing people, recognizing people, validating people, highlighting people, and then maybe a bit of swag, but that can come further down the line. when we're systematic in this, what happens is it feels very, to your point, feels very nurtured. It feels like, oh, I joined this community and I keep finding myself going back to it, in the same way that I'm sure you're the same as I am, Irina. When I wake up in the morning, I grab my phone and the first thing I do is I open my email every single time, every morning. My Google inbox is always open and I check it multiple times a day because we've built a habit around that. And we just need to do the same thing in building a habit and people going and hanging out in your community. And the only way to do that is to be systematic in what you put out there. But when you do it, and again, when you overload it on value, when it's content that's solving those pain points of your audience, when it's conversation starters that are things that people can, not just are interesting to people, but they can participate in. Like we did one the other week on our community leadership course Slack, where I posted a picture of my desk and I said, hey, everyone, share your desk photos. Loads of people went and responded. That's not educational, but it's just a nice way of getting to a sense of like the people you're hanging out with.
That's amazing. That's amazing, Jono. I love this, that we ended on this like super practical, maybe sort of steps from Jono's book. Yeah, you can check it out. And I'm super grateful to have you on the show and to have you to be in your course as well, in the accelerator program.
We love having Evil Martians in. You folks are amazing. Not just you do amazing work. You're just really nice people and you're fun to talk to. And one of the things I always love about working with you and your team is you're just always striving to go to the next level. Like there's never any sense of standing still.
Thank you, Jono. Thank you. I hope we'll see each other soon. Yep. Thank you. Thanks for catching yet another episode of Dev Propulsion Labs, brought to you by Evil Martians. We transform early-stage startups into unicorns, build developer tools, and create open-source products. We'd be thrilled to chat with you about your startup. Visit evilmartians.com/devtools to make it happen. See you in the next